We all know someone like him. A man who doesn't speak much, doesn't complain, doesn't fight back until it's too late to regret it. The kind who waits, watches, absorbs everything. The kind people ignore until it's them on the ground in this city. People like that are either ghosts or threats. And the truth is, no one can tell the difference anymore. So when a couple of cocky nobodies wearing fake badges decided to shove a homeless bum to the wall and slap a baton across his ribs like they were on some street-level power trip, they didn't think twice. But they should have. Because Jason Statham wasn't just watching, he was recording. It started in a rain-slick alley behind a closed pawn shop on Beckett Avenue. Broken neon buzzed overhead, puddles scattered in footprints. A kid, barely 16, had been cornered by two men with badge chains and mirrored sunglasses. One of them had a chest cam flashing red. The other held a zip tie between two fingers like he was about to win a prize. Jason stood 10 feet away, slouched against a rusted dumpster, hood up. Scars visible. They didn't even glance at him. The kid's voice cracked, too young to sound defiant, too old to cry. One of the fake cops jammed a hand into the kid's jacket and pulled out a small bag of powder, stage prop, pre-sealed, pre-printed. It hadn't been in the kid's coat 10 seconds ago. Jason saw it, recorded it, time-stamped it. Then the punch came. One of the fakes swung wide and hit the kid in the ribs. He doubled over, wheezing. Jason flinched slightly just in the hand. The camera in his coat switched modes. Facial recognition, active. That was when the third man walked in, shaved head, smug look. He had unit commander stenciled on his knockoff jacket, but the patch was ironed on crooked. He swaggered like someone used to being obeyed by people more scared than smart. He locked eyes with Jason. No words, just a glance. He laughed, the short, dismissive kind, then spat near Jason's boots and muttered something to his guys. Jason didn't blink, he just watched like always. They grabbed the kid, forced him to the wall. The one with the zip tie pulled out his phone, filming. Laughing, hashtagging, Jason's fingers slid across his ribs under the coat. No weapons, just a fob. He clicked it, one signal, 5 recipients, all silent, all waiting. 10 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. Real uniform, real sirens, but the paperwork inside was fake. Jason knew. He'd seen this pattern 5 times in 3 weeks. Different boroughs, same rhythm. You arrest a kid with a staged charge, you run it through one dirty server. You lose the footage, and you collect the quota, simple, clean, until someone pulls the wrong thread. Jason stepped away from the dumpster. His boots hit the puddles without a splash. They turned. "Look at this guy," one of the fakes muttered. The commander smirked. "Hey, you lost your tent or something, Grandpa?" Jason didn't answer. He walked past them, slowly. The kid, now cuffed, stared at him with wide, shaking eyes. Jason met them for just half a second, and then he was gone around the corner. 3 hours later, in a one-room storage unit with peeling insulation and a hardwired modem hidden under scrap metal, Jason loaded the footage into 3 separate drives, each one encoded with a failsafe that traced any attempt to wipe it. He labeled them not with numbers, but with sounds. The first, whimper; the second, snap; the third, fall. He slipped one into a locker near a train station, one into the back pocket of a janitor who owed him nothing, and one he mailed to a name no one used anymore, but it used to belong to him. That night the footage leaked. But not on Twitter, not on the usual channels. It showed up in a parent group thread on a school forum. It showed up in a message board for retired officers. It showed up in an encrypted chat room only used by ex-contractors with revoked licenses, each version slightly different. Each one cut to reveal a different angle of the same crime, same kid, same alley, same 3 men, but from different distances, one from behind the cruiser, one from the dumpster reflection, and one from body height. Someone asked, "How did they even get this?" The reply came 2 hours later, anonymous, simple, because someone wanted it seen. The next day, the commander's face was blurred on the local news, but the jacket, the badge, the voice all matched. He denied everything, claimed the footage was AI generated, that the homeless man was probably a paid actor. The department promised an internal review, but the footage wouldn't go away. It kept reposting, copying, morphing, and someone had tagged every upload with the same phrase, "There's more." In the city's underground transport tunnel near Old Terminal 6, Jason walked through steam and silence. His boots scraped rusted concrete. The lights buzzed overhead like dying flies. On the wall, a symbol, 3 lines, Interlocked, it wasn't gang. It wasn't art. It was a signal. Jason reached into a crack in the bricks and pulled out a sealed folder. Inside, names, addresses, and a photo, not of the commander, not of the kid, of a woman, mid-30s. Burned scar on the jaw, same uniform as the fake cops, but she wasn't in the footage. Jason stared at it for a long time, then folded it in half and lit it on fire. Not because it wasn't useful, because he didn't want it shared, not yet. The fake cops didn't go into hiding, they doubled down. 2 nights later, another kid got arrested. But this one had a camera sewn into his shirt tag, and when they lifted him, he whispered a name, one the cop didn't expect. A name Jason had used once in Montenegro during a sting gone wrong. That night, the commander didn't go home. He drove around the city for 3 hours. Then finally pulled into a parking garage, alone. His hands shook when he locked the door. The dash light flickered, and the footage from the alley started playing on his phone again and again and again. He threw it out the window, the phone shattered, but the audio kept playing. From the speakers, from the mirror, from the car system itself. Meanwhile, Jason stood 2 blocks away in an alley lit by red LED strips. A stranger handed him a burner, said nothing. Jason took it, tapped a code. The voice on the other end said one thing, target confirmed. He thinks you're bluffing. Jason didn't reply. He didn't need to. He was already walking toward the next address. And across the city, one of the men from the alley was about to find a key taped to his apartment door with a note that read, "You should have looked closer." In cities like this, pain doesn't echo, it sinks into alleys, into basements, into the minds of people who think the world owes them fear. Jason Statham didn't need to introduce himself. He didn't need to warn anyone. That part of his life was over. The part where he gave people chances. What he needed now was access. And the man who had it, he lived 6 floors below a broken church with no roof. Jason moved like memory down the sidewalk, past storefronts that never reopened. He didn't draw eyes, just another washed-out face under a battered hoodie. At the corner, 2 kids shared a cigarette under a payphone that hadn't worked in years. One of them nodded toward the alley behind them. That was the only sign Jason needed. The door behind the church was metal, scratched, no lock, no handle. Jason tapped it twice, waited, tapped once. It opened. Inside, darkness, wires, burnt incense. The air was thick with old heat and server dust. A man in a frayed beanie sat at a desk built from scavenged wood and melted drive trays. He didn't look up, just slid over a data block. Jason took it, opened the casing, checked the ports. Then finally spoke, one word, low and flat. "Clean." The man nodded once. Jason dropped a slip of plastic on the desk and turned to leave on the plastic. A thumbprint, real. His that was trust or bait, he didn't care which. Back in the city core, the fake cops were scrambling. The commander had issued a blacklisted order. Scrub the footage, discredit the source, intimidate the kid. But none of it stuck, because the footage wasn't centralized. It was forked, a dozen variations already fed to watchdog groups and automation scrapers. Even if they got the original down, 10 more would pop up overnight, and worse, someone had removed metadata from their own body cams, which meant whoever filmed it had been in the system. Not a random bystander, someone who knew the format, someone like Jason Statham. At 2:43 a.m., Jason stood in the stairwell of an unfinished condo project. Half the windows were boarded. The cameras didn't work. The walls were tagged with warnings, but the roof had clean line of sight. He opened a black case and pulled out a drone, small, matte black, silent rotors. He linked it to the block he'd picked up earlier, then launched it. One feed, one flight, and he watched. The drone hovered over Precinct 9 back parking lot. Several cruisers, one truck, no plates. Jason zoomed in. Inside the truck bed, equipment boxes. One marked with red tape, the kind only used in stings. Not city ops. He locked the tag, rerouted the footage, and overlaid it with archive logs. That truck had been reported stolen 6 months ago, then relisted as Special Operations Transport. They weren't just fake cops. They were real once. Burned, discarded, now acting like nothing ever happened. Jason didn't blink. He opened a folder from the drive. Inside, personal logs, names, shift overlaps, and at the bottom, a badge ID, burned, expired. It used to be his. He stared at it for a long moment. Then copied the file, dragged it into a folder labeled shame, and moved on. Across town, the kid who'd been arrested sat alone in a city holding room. The charges had vanished, no paperwork, no file, no fingerprint, but the bruises stayed. He looked at his reflection in the two-way mirror, then whispered the name again, the one Jason hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade, who told him didn't matter. The name was out now, and it had weight. That afternoon, Jason walked past a checkpoint with a blind scanner. The system pinged red, not for Jason, for the man in line behind him. A man with a forged badge. Jason kept walking. He didn't even glance back as the guards tackled the guy and dragged him into a scanner booth. Inside Jason's jacket, the scanner app logged it all. Another plant. Another fake. Let the system clean itself slowly. He wasn't here to save it. Just show people what it really was. Later, in an abandoned diner near Riverside, Jason met someone from his past. Not a friend, not quite an enemy. A woman with a limp and a pendant carved from old Comtech. She didn't sit, just dropped a folder on the table and walked away. Inside, 3 photos, all from different states, all showing the same face in different uniforms, same man, different names. Jason didn't need more proof, he needed positioning. By midnight, he was on the rooftop of a 20-story warehouse under renovation. Wind howled. Rain pushed sideways. His coat snapped like a flag. He placed a micro-recorder beneath a rooftop vent, not to spy, to transmit, to send out a single silent pulse. It carried no words, just a signature. One only 5 people in the country would recognize. One of them had trained him, another had buried him. And one was still watching. Down below, 2 of the fake cops were drinking in the back of a truck. They were laughing about the video, playing it on loop like a joke. They didn't notice the third man, the quiet one, wasn't laughing. He just stared at the screen. Then asked a question no one heard. Why didn't he fight back? No one had an answer. But they would. Inside a locker under Line 12 Metro Hub, a woman opened a package inside. A burner phone already powered on. It played one video, the alley Jason. The kid, the cops. She watched in silence. Then turned toward the surveillance mirror. She nodded once, and the lights flickered in the tunnel. Jason stood at the far end, motionless. The world was waking up, but not the way they expected. Because this wasn't just about one bad arrest. This was about exposure, reversal, punishment. And the next name on his list, it wasn't the commander. It was the one who recruited the commander 5 years ago under a different name. And Jason had just walked into the building across the street from his apartment, without a sound. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it breathes shallow. Like the man sitting alone in the basement locker room of Precinct 9, staring at the same 14-second video on loop, the image of Jason Statham walking past them, hood up, face visible, no confrontation, no threat, just a look, then silence. That silence was louder now than anything the department had to say. 2 hours earlier, Jason had stepped into the maintenance sublevel of a condemned hospital, where his boots echoed down corridors that hadn't seen power since the city changed hands. He wasn't hiding. He was positioning. Dust clung to every broken screen and forgotten Roman IV bag. A single motion sensor pinged red as he passed. Behind a cracked mirror in the east stairwell, he found it, a lockbox welded into concrete. Inside, a vest, not tactical, civilian, but wired. Patches in the lining, thick with copper mesh and outdated sensors. This wasn't for defense. It was for proof. He pulled it on without hesitation, then shut the locker and walked back into the city like it owed him nothing, because it didn't. Back at the precinct, the commanders were falling apart. Internal affairs had shown up, but not from downtown. These were silent, plain clothes, no press, no ID. One asked for coffee. Another asked where the body cam drives were stored. Neither smiled. By the time the precinct's actual lieutenant arrived, it was already too late, because someone, anonymous, had submitted a chain of video files with timestamp pings that matched not just one false arrest but 6 different victims. Same audio, same voices. The fingerprints were in the voice samples, and someone had already matched one of them to a man supposedly killed in action 4 years ago. Jason Statham wasn't attacking. He was resurfacing slowly, and that was worse. Because now the fake cops didn't know how many others had already seen him. At 1:12 a.m., Jason entered a freight elevator beneath the old Southbridge silo. He didn't push a button, he just waited. The elevator started to descend, even though no lights were on. Below, 5 stories down, the floor opened into a tunnel lined with chalk marks and shattered bricks. There was only one source of light, a laptop, closed, still warm, next to it, a folded napkin, written in ink. He trained us too well. Jason didn't pick it up, he just stared. Then walked past it into the dark. Above ground, one of the fake cops, the tallest, left his apartment at 3:09 a.m. He didn't notice the envelope tucked under his windshield wiper. It wasn't addressed. Inside, a single flash drive. No label. He plugged it into his TV out of curiosity. It played security footage of himself, taken from a diner he didn't know had cameras. It showed him slipping a forged warrant to a waitress, then pocketing her tip money. He froze, then ran outside to check the car. But the envelope was gone. Jason was watching from across the street. From a rooftop, from a forgotten window behind rusted blinds, elsewhere in a parking structure near 8th and Rose, two fake cops sat in silence. One scrolled through social media. The other stared at a burner phone they didn't remember owning. It lit up on its own. No number, just a file. The alley scene again, but this version had audio clear enough to isolate breath patterns. One voice matched, theirs, and the second a faint whisper almost imperceptible just as Jason walked away in the clip. It said, "He's not here to warn you." Then the phone screen cracked. From the inside, at 4:45 a.m., Jason returned to the underground tunnel. This time he wasn't alone. The woman from the diner, the one with the pendant, was waiting by the broken terminal. She didn't speak. She just handed him a worn-out Metro badge. The kind issued to security agents from 3 administrations ago. Jason scanned it against a keypad built into the tunnel wall. It lit green. The door unlocked. Inside, a locker room, torn maps, printed names, photos of the same unit, all erased, all forgotten. One photo was different. Jason stared at it longer than the rest. It showed him, before the scar, before the fallout, before the silence. And in the background, smiling, was the man now pretending to be the unit commander. Jason took the photo, folded it, slipped it into his coat, then walked back out into the city. At sunrise, the commander stood in front of his shattered bathroom mirror, breathing hard. His phone had been pinging for hours. Unknown numbers, no messages, just location tags, one in his office, one in his cruiser, one in his bedroom. Each arrived with a timestamp and a single phrase, seen. Heard. Known. No demands, no threats, just awareness. That's what terrified him most. Jason wasn't out to stop them. He was out to make them visible to each other, to the world, to themselves. That morning, an alert pinged in the city's surveillance scrub log. A new facial ID was uploaded. It didn't match any known subject, but the alert said one thing: partial match with deceased asset, Class 7, redacted origin, shadow-level access suspected. The code was ancient, most people had never heard it used, but for the few who had, they knew what it meant. Someone wasn't just alive. Someone was operational. Jason Statham sat on a bench across from a preschool playground. Kids laughed behind him. Parents texted, called, checked watches. He just stared straight ahead. A bird landed beside him, flew off again. He waited, and at exactly 9:17 a.m., a paper cup was placed beside him by a hand wearing surgical tape. No words, just steam rising from the cup and a folded receipt taped to the bottom. He waited until the hand was gone, then peeled the tape. On the back of the receipt, coordinates and one word scratched in block letters: train. Jason didn't move right away. He just let the sunlight warm his coat, then stood, because someone had just invited him to where this all began, and whoever did was about to wish they hadn't. Beneath a city pretending everything's fine, the truth moves like water, slow, silent, unstoppable. And Jason Statham was already halfway under. The coordinates written under the paper cup led to a place long abandoned by most. An old train yard outside District 4, surrounded by scrap, flooded tunnels, and fences topped with coils of rusted wire. It wasn't the kind of place people came back from, but Jason had been here before, not as a visitor, as a witness, to a betrayal that was never documented, and a lie that was still being lived. He walked between the shattered rails, boots sinking slightly into moss-covered gravel. To his left, a broken passenger car listed sideways, its door torn off like it had been peeled open. To his right, a derailed cargo container sat under a collapsed bridge, tagged with warnings in 3 languages. He stopped at the clearing. Kneeling in the weeds, partially covered in dirt, was a steel hatch, no handle, just a thumbprint panel still faintly powered. Jason knelt, pressed the scarred pad of his right thumb against it. The lock clicked. not because it recognized him, because someone wanted him to be let in. Inside, the air was stale and hot. No light except for the faint red glow of emergency backups along the floor. He moved down the tunnel with precision, not rushed, not slow, like he already knew where it ended. Around the final bend he found it, an old command chair, folded maps, empty coffee cups from a brand that stopped existing 5 years ago, and a screen, black, until he stepped closer. Then it lit up, his face years younger. No beard, no scars, captured mid-sentence in a debrief from an operation that was supposed to be sealed. Someone had the tapes. Someone had access, and someone had been watching. Across the city. The commander's phone buzzed again. But this time it wasn't anonymous. It was labeled internal memo, and it had one attachment, a still image of him in the alley, backed by Jason's shadow. His mouth hung open slightly, the baton mid-swing, timestamp. The exact second he made the decision to hit a restrained teenager. There was no caption, just that moment, frozen, perfect, unjustifiable. Jason leaned forward at the console and keyed open the side tray. Inside, a drive. Label, doubt. He slipped it into his pocket and turned to leave. But just before he exited, a static burst crackled from an old speaker near the vent. He paused, then it came again, clearer this time. A voice he hadn't heard in 7 years. It said 2 words, one name, then silence. Jason's jaw clenched, not in fear and recognition. He walked out without a sound. Elsewhere, the woman from the diner moved through a private server room with no lights. She connected 3 lines, ran a verification pulse, then activated a soft boot. Screens blinked. The footage Jason had gathered from the alley, the body cams, the drone, began sinking into one continuous reel. But not for the press, for one target, someone higher, someone clean but blind. The goal wasn't revenge, it was removal. That night, every unit in Precinct 9 received an anonymous message on their precinct tablets. If you're real, you're in danger. If you're not, you're next. One rookie dropped his badge. The rest ignored it, until the lights in the evidence room began flickering. The servers reset, and one name reappeared in their flagged list of erased agents, not with a profile picture, with a red triangle, and 2 words under it, active field. Jason Statham moved through the city unnoticed, now in plain clothes, no coat, no visible gear. He boarded a train headed west 3 stops. Then exited, crossed an empty courtyard, and slipped into the rear entrance of an auto shop closed since the riots. Inside, he opened a floor panel and pulled out a crate. Inside, a change of clothes, a burner laptop, a single Polaroid slightly burned, and a small black key with no teeth. That key didn't open doors. It triggered a system, one that hadn't run in a decade. But Jason had hardwired it into every broadcast tower the city never finished upgrading. He walked toward one of them now, a fenced dome behind a junkyard, partially camouflaged by graffiti and time. It took him 4 minutes to reach the console, 2 to override the local grid, and 1 to upload the first phase. The message wasn't a video, it wasn't a face, it was text, silent and bright. He never raised his hands. You raised yours, the world will watch now. Then a countdown, 00:58:42 in a hotel on the opposite side of the city. A woman woke up to her television already on. The message was there. She hadn't touched the remote. Down the hall, another man's phone showed it too. Across the city, public displays started blinking. Taxis, lobbies, atoms. Screens in gyms and food courts, everyone repeating the same sentence. He never raised his hands. The city's mayor called a digital emergency halt. But the stream wasn't traceable, because the stream wasn't broadcasted. It was injected into the very spine of the grid. Someone who had once built it now owned it, and that someone was already riding an unmarked maintenance truck through the east tunnels, with a new file tucked into his chest pocket labeled Witness 01. Jason Statham didn't move fast. He didn't speak. He didn't send threats. He just showed up. And now the people who mocked him in the alley couldn't leave theirs without checking corners, elevators, bathroom stalls. Because the man they called homeless wasn't hiding. He was returning, piece by piece, scene by scene. And just before sunrise, one of the men who watched him walk away that night opened his fridge. Inside, beside the orange juice, was a VHS tape. No label, just a sticker on the case. Replay that moment. The one where you laughed. He didn't press play, not yet. Because from behind him, the front door creaked open, no footsteps, No sound, just air pressure shifting and a shadow not running, not attacking, just waiting. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the air was already thick, not with heat but with memory. Jason Statham moved through the edge of District 7 with the practiced ease of someone who no longer wanted recognition. He wasn't wearing gear, no armor, no disguise. Just tired boots and a thumb drive in his pocket labeled doubt. The streets here smelled like burnt oil and old concrete. Construction projects that started and died within the same fiscal year. Half-finished towers fenced in by advertisements nobody read. And down the alley near 19th and Banner, a forgotten barbershop had its blinds pulled halfway. Inside, someone waiting, not for a cut, but for clearance. Jason entered without knocking. The man inside, late 60s, one eye glassy, didn't look up. He just nodded once toward the back room, then returned to sweeping hair that hadn't fallen that day. Jason stepped past, into the room where old files never went to die, just to hide. The drawer was already unlocked. He placed the doubt drive inside, closed it, pressed play on the reel-to-reel beneath it. No sound came through, but the transmission activated 3 relays across the district. One of them fed straight into a satellite terminal no longer listed in federal archives. The message had moved, again. And now, someone much bigger had received it. Meanwhile, at Precinct 9, chaos was fracturing into fear. 2 desks had been cleared, 3 officers were under non-disciplinary leave, and a 4th, one who hadn't even been in the alley, had turned in his badge by sunrise. Not because he was guilty, because he was scared, the kind of scared that doesn't speak, the kind that makes a man want to disappear. But disappear into what? That's the question Jason wanted them all to ask. At 7:06 a.m., a garbage truck rolled through a narrow corridor near Southridge. No logo, no tag, but inside the compactor's outer casing, a briefcase was sealed tight against the steel frame. It wasn't trash. It was a portable relay core, one Jason had hardwired months ago. The truck paused near a government records building just long enough for the signal to piggyback into the tower's private uplink. Another push, another wave. This one didn't go public. It went internal, to every precinct supervisor who still used legacy ID access. All it said was, the man in the footage once had clearance higher than you. Then it showed a still image from 11 years ago, a war zone, smoke, chaos, and Jason Statham, arm wrapped in gauze, leading civilians through a collapsed embassy hall, classified, until now. The commanders couldn't scrub it, couldn't ignore it, couldn't explain how a man they labeled homeless agitator was on a file with international security access from a conflict that was never officially admitted to. And worst of all, they had no idea how many copies existed. Jason Statham didn't wait to find out. He was already in transit, not by rail but by supply line, hidden beneath tarps in the back of a dry food delivery truck headed toward a forgotten water utility station. He'd buried the access tunnel a year ago, and now it was time to dig it up. Because beneath that station was a memory they never purged, not just a data core, but a person. Someone who'd vanished the same week Jason was marked inactive, and who might know where the next names were buried. The truck stopped at 9:27 a.m. Jason slid out silently, boots hitting gravel, moving with controlled silence across the side lot. No one saw him enter. No one saw him unscrew the rusted panel at the back of the old shed. The access point was still there, welded shut from the outside, but only glued inside. He pulled it open, flashlight on, descending into darkness lined with pipes and leaking valves. At the bottom, a sealed lab door, and on it, scratched faintly into the rust, takes one ghost to find another. Jason's hand hovered over the keypad. He didn't press anything. He just waited. And the door unlocked itself. Back at headquarters, the commander stared at a new alert. It came from a civilian phone. No number attached, just a GIF, Jason's face. Then a crossfade, his image on top of their precinct badge. Then a phrase, "You wear it." He built it. It wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about origin. And Jason was unearthing everything they pretended didn't exist. Down below in the lab, the lights flickered to life one at a time. Jason walked past cracked monitors and empty chairs, then paused. In the far corner, a figure sat slumped over a desk, alive, barely, wrapped in wires, breathing through tubes. His name was Ashran Vale, and he used to run ops for Jason's unit before the dissolution. He was a ghost too, and he remembered everyone. Jason knelt beside him, didn't speak. Just slid a photograph across the desk. Ashran's eyes opened, slow, unfocused, but then locked on the image, the alley, the fake cops, and one of them with a ring on his finger, a unit ring, one only issued to the Omega list. Jason leaned back. And for the first time since this began, he wasn't angry, he was cold. Because the Omega list was only supposed to have 3 names still alive. Now there were 4, and one of them wore a badge. It was never supposed to resurface. The Omega list. Just a myth inside a myth, names burned from databases, photos erased, units scattered across black ops and wet work that didn't officially exist. But now, Jason Statham had seen a face, not in war footage, not on some archive in an alley, wearing a badge, pretending to be a cop. Pretending to be clean, and that changed everything. In the silence of the bunker, Ashran Vale's breath rattled beneath the tubes wrapped across his chest. He hadn't spoken in years. They had silenced him chemically, surgically, but he didn't need to speak, he could point. And what he pointed at, slow, twitching, was a vault behind the server bank, half-collapsed from time and pressure. Jason walked to it, running his hand across the scorched logo near the lock. It wasn't government, it wasn't mercenary. It was contractor-marked Blink level. The kind of operation where mistakes didn't go to court, they went missing. And Jason had worn this logo once, before the burn, before the orders that went sideways, before the tape. Back at Precinct 9, the commander paced inside a sealed conference room. The VHS from his fridge was now running on the flat screen. Not through a player, through the room's own encrypted system. That wasn't possible, unless someone had root access, real root. Jason's face appeared in profile, younger, clean-shaven, reading coordinates into a headset while bullets tore past him in a grainy Warzone feed. Behind him, 2 squad members fell. He didn't flinch. The image paused. Overlaid on it, 2 digital file names appeared. Omega 03, Omega 07, then the screen cut to static, and stayed there. The commander stared, then turned to the precinct's security chief, and said nothing. Because what could he say? Someone who wasn't supposed to be alive had just played him a recording from a ghost system that didn't exist. Jason Statham moved deeper into the lab. He passed a corridor with peeling walls and lights that flickered to a rhythm, not random but coded. He paused, watched the flicker, then matched the pattern, dash, dot, dot, dash, dash, Morse code, via LE. It was a tag. A signature from the man who'd built most of the silent encryption still running in the underbelly of the city's grid. Jason followed the light trail into a chamber sealed with a steel grate. He didn't try to pry it. He just listened. And somewhere beneath it, faint, metallic, he heard a ticking sound, not mechanical, biometric, a pulse detector reading his rhythm and matching it. It unlocked on its own. Inside, a seat, a projector, and a thin folder labeled only Red Hour Echo Pattern JS. He sat, loaded the reel, and watched himself walk away from something he didn't remember. Back on the surface, in a state-run server vault near District 4, a subgrid analyst named Daisy Holt noticed an anomaly. Every secure stream in the city had rerouted, not shut down, rerouted. As if avoiding something silently crawling beneath the network's skin, she ran a trace. It looped back to a dormant node tagged Omega R. That prefix wasn't in her system. She called it in. 2 minutes later, her access was revoked. 5 minutes after that, she left the building and didn't return. Jason stood now in front of a projected frame. He was in it, standing outside an apartment complex on 5th, talking to someone in shadow. Then, the camera zoomed. The man in the frame wore a ring. Omega Standard, same man from the alley, different name, different haircut, same wristband scar. Jason froze the frame. Behind the man on the wall was a logo, a fake precinct badge, but not the one they wore in public. This was older, darker. A template used for staging ops in failed states, never meant for domestic deployment. Someone had revived it, repurposed it. Jason's hand curled into a fist, because now he knew. This wasn't a rogue cop unit. This was his old unit, reactivated under a new mask. And he wasn't just a problem. He was the loose thread they didn't finish cutting. Elsewhere, in a warehouse district gutted after the riots, a group of men in tactical gear reviewed body cam footage on a portable rig. No insignias, no standard issue plates. They weren't looking at Jason's footage. They were looking at the reaction, how many people had shared it, how fast the precincts were unraveling, how visible it was all becoming. One of them whispered a number, 7 digits. Another nodded and opened a laptop. It showed a profile labeled Override Request Class Z Ghost Asset. Below it, a photo, Jason, pre-burn, status, unavailable. Then the tag changed, active, and the final box blinked red, execute full replacement protocol. They didn't click it yet, because someone higher still hadn't made the call, but when they did, Jason wouldn't just be hunted, he'd be replaced by someone wearing his story. Back in the lab, Ashran Vale reached up with a shaking hand. Jason knelt beside him. Vale didn't speak. He just opened a tray beneath the desk. Inside, a drive. Its label wasn't doubt, it was control. And beneath it, a folded list of names. Jason opened it. 6 names, 4 crossed out. 2 still active. One of them circled, the man from the alley, the other unknown. Jason folded it again, slid the drive into his pocket and stood behind him. Ashran whispered one final word before collapsing back into his silence. Jason heard it. He didn't react. But that one word changed everything, because it wasn't a location, it wasn't a warning, it was a name, one that wasn't supposed to be alive either. But now, he was next. Names don't fade, they just get buried. And Jason Statham was standing above 6 of them. 4 crossed out. 2 still alive. 1 wearing a badge, but the other hadn't surfaced in a decade. Jason's hand curled tighter around the list. Ashran Vale was breathing shallow behind him, but his message had landed. A name. Just a name. But that was all Jason needed. Because buried behind that name was an entire city of erased consequences. The freight elevator groaned as Jason rose out of the lab, a rusting box barely holding together by cables that had long stopped being inspected. He moved without urgency. No one was chasing him. Yet. But by the time they figured out what he'd recovered, they wouldn't just chase. They'd replicate. That was the protocol now. Full replacement. Silence the original. Rebuild the story. Make the lie louder than the man. Jason knew because he'd written the original structure himself. Back when they still used his code. Back when he still wore the ring. Topside, a city transport station buzzed with early shift commuters. Some rushed. Some waited. One man, seated quietly on a bench at the far corner of the platform, didn't check the schedule. He was watching the reflections in the glass. Watching for Jason. Jason arrived through the maintenance corridor, not on the grid. The man stood slowly, holding nothing but a crumpled paper bag. Jason nodded once, then walked past him. Inside the bag, a burner phone and an encrypted key tag with 2 digits, 02. At the same time, in a regional security substation in South Precinct, an internal task force was trying to erase Jason's digital existence. But something was resisting. Every time they wiped a log, a new one appeared. Every time they flagged an IP, it rerouted through blind tunnels, some connected to old city infrastructure no longer even mapped. One junior officer spoke aloud. He's not just in the system, he is the system. They didn't realize how close to right they were. Jason hadn't just infiltrated networks, he'd helped build the city's silent layer. And now, he was taking it back. Jason walked toward a weather-worn hardware repair shop near East 17th. Inside, a woman with thick braids and burnt sleeves was reassembling a busted signal amplifier. She looked up once, didn't smile, just nodded toward the back. Jason passed through the repair area, stepped into the caged hallway and keyed the digits. 02. A panel slid open, not a door, a wall. Behind it, a converted vault humming faintly in the center, a projector and a collapsible chair. He activated the sequence. The screen flickered, not with files, but with a face, not his, not Ashran's. The second uncrossed name, a man named Callan Rush, former communications director, classified as lost in theater. Officially, deceased, unofficially. Jason was now watching a video timestamped 2 weeks ago. Rush, alive, speaking into a lens. He was in hiding, and he was talking about the same badge, the same cop, the same Omega insignia used to stage containment incidents in former war zones, and now being worn on the streets of this city. Rush's final line before the feed ended chilled the room. If you're seeing this, then you're still in. And if he's wearing the ring, the others are too. I'm not the last. Jason stood still. The feed auto-erased. He didn't move for 30 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a map, and circled a new sector. The Glass Channel, a port district abandoned after the blackout fires. That's where he'd go next, because Rush had left one last clue. A hand signal, 4 fingers and a bent thumb. Jason knew it. It wasn't military. It was old squad code for "the king's mask cracks first." At that same hour across the city, the fake cop, the one from the alley, met in private with 2 men at a river dock. No cameras, no light, only the whisper of water slapping against rusted hulls. One man handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, 6 photos, one of them, a still of Jason taken that same morning. Another, a woman walking near a school, her name blacked out. The alley cop clenched his jaw, not because of fear, because he realized something he hadn't said out loud yet. Jason wasn't just exposing them. He was testing them. In the command center under District 9, a red light pulsed on a secure feed. The central screen read, "Crosslink detected. Vault Echo. Access granted." The system was now being used by a ghost who was supposed to be gone, and they couldn't stop it, only follow it. But every path Jason opened, he'd already closed 3 behind him. On the edge of the glass channel, Jason Statham stepped from a silent train tunnel into open ruin, collapsed loading cranes, rotting piers, cold fog rolling off the black water like breath from the past. He walked along the edge until he found the shipping container half buried in silt. Inside, a crate, labeled Replicant Stock Control Run 2. He opened it slowly. Inside, uniforms, weapons, and 6 vials labeled with ID codes, not drugs, behavioral override sequences. Jason stood over them, face hardening. They weren't just copying officers. They were preparing to overwrite real people. He stepped out of the container and into the fog. Above him, a drone hovered, silent, tracking, streaming, but Jason already knew. He looked straight up, lifted one hand, and held up the old squad sign, 4 fingers, bent thumb, letting them know, "I saw you first." They didn't build it overnight. The structure behind Jason's erasure, the one now unraveling, took years to perfect. It wasn't digital, not really. It was human, behavioral, small edits over time. Small enough that by the time you questioned what was missing, it had already been forgotten. Jason didn't forget. He was the one they used to test the memory cuts. But now, he'd found one of the last threads they didn't burn, and it wasn't a file. It was a woman. Her name wasn't on the list. But she appeared in 2 of the photos Jason retrieved from the crate at the glass channel. One photo had her walking her daughter to school. The other, holding Jason's old field notebook, the one they swore was incinerated in the fire vault 12 years ago. And behind her, partially visible in the photo's edge, a mark, not a scar, a barcode, just like the ones inside the vials Jason had found. That wasn't possible, unless she had been part of the prototype testing phase, not the operatives but the civilian control group. Jason folded the photos, slid them into the inside pocket of his coat, and vanished back into the mist. Across the city, in a tower with blacked-out floors and no official registry, a single room was lit with blue. Inside, a man watched the drone feed Jason had signaled. He didn't react, didn't shift, just spoke into the silence. He saw it. Another voice crackled in from the speaker near his knee, and he sent the sign. The man nodded once, then pressed his thumb to a flat screen, activating the replacement model index. 12 profiles appeared, 9 marked decommissioned. 3 remained, 1 flickered, Jason's. But not his Jason, the copy, still inactive, still waiting, but now warming up. Jason didn't know the full plan yet, but he knew the signs. He'd been in cities like this before, on missions that weren't called missions, cleaning up incidents that hadn't happened, not officially. He'd watched as cities reprogrammed their own memory, and now, it was happening here. He was going to break it from the inside. By sundown, he'd reached the north edge of the blockade zone. The area was still considered unstable since the reactor protest turned violent, but Jason wasn't here for the grid. He was here for a name scratched into a wall. Callan Rush had mentioned it in the video. Check the Mercury stairwell. What they left behind couldn't lie if it tried. The Mercury stairwell had once been the emergency access to a data cluster buried under the transit line. Now, it was welded shut. Jason pried open the access grate near its base, crawled through mud, slid down an old drainage rail, and dropped into the dark. The stairwell was quiet, too quiet. Jason descended quickly, not carefully. There wasn't time for subtlety anymore. He reached sub-level 4 and stopped in front of a steel door. Its keypad was destroyed, but the hinges weren't. He jammed his crowbar under the bottom lip and applied pressure. It shrieked, then gave way. Inside, a small, single-room archive. 1 shelf, one light, and on the shelf, 3 identical hard drives, each labeled with a number, each etched with an omega sigil. But it was the photo pinned to the wall above them that froze him. It was him, years ago, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in hospital linen. The background not a hospital, a chamber, lit blue, no windows, the barcode visible on the child's wrist, the note beneath the image. No memory survives perfectly, but the body always remembers the origin. Jason reached forward and touched the edge of the photo, not with reverence, with rage, because it wasn't a memory. It was a lie they built around him, and now, he knew where the original recordings were kept. At the edge of District 12, inside a government cooling facility retrofitted for media protection, a woman stared at a monitor blinking in red, an alert, triggered not by breach, but by recognition. Jason Statham's biometrics had pinged the vault. She didn't report it, she shut the alert down. Because in her past life, she had worn the same ring, and she remembered what Jason had done and refused to do. He wasn't just another ghost. He was the only one who turned it down, and now, he'd come back for the rest. Jason left the archive chamber without taking anything. He didn't need files, he needed witnesses. People who weren't supposed to be awake or alive but were still functioning on the city's edge, and one of them, the girl in the photo, not a baby anymore, now a teenager, living in Sector 9 under a new identity, not watched, not marked, but left untouched. And that was the mistake they made, because Jason had nothing left to lose, but she hadn't even begun to understand who she was. He stepped out into the stairwell and closed the vault behind him. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from control. Because the truth wasn't just bigger than he expected, it was older, deeper, and tied to him in a way no data feed or case file ever could explain. They hadn't erased Jason Statham. They'd reprogrammed the world to act like he was never part of it, and the only way to reverse it was to make every camera, every voice, every archive remember him again in real time, not as the man they buried, but as the one they hadn't remembered yet. The apartment was too quiet for a house with broken windows. Dust hung in the light beams like old secrets, and the smell of soap still clung to the hallway, though no one had cleaned anything in days. She moved through the bedroom slowly, not like someone searching, like someone grieving. She'd stopped crying 2 nights ago, when it became clear that nothing the news said matched the bruise on her brother's neck. Nothing the precinct promised explained the panic that kept tightening inside her chest. And now this, a drawer that stuck for no reason. She pulled harder. The bottom lip gave way. And there, tucked between a stack of old textbooks and an envelope with no return address, was the photo. It wasn't just a face. It was a moment, stuck in time, uncaptioned, undocumented, like it was meant to be found only by someone who already knew what it meant. She didn't know the man's name until the footage dropped, but her brother had known. That's why he circled the edges of the photo with red ink, why he'd scratched out a part of the background that showed a badge, but not one she'd ever seen. She held the photo in one hand and her phone in the other, tried to scan it. The app crashed, tried to send it. The message failed. The photo wasn't just old, it was shielded on purpose. She looked out the window toward the street where that fake arrest started everything. And for the first time in 3 days, she didn't feel helpless. She felt hunted. And if Jason Statham was the one being hunted with her, she needed to find him, because her brother didn't die for nothing. Across the city, Jason stepped through the back corridor of a hydroelectric waste station that hadn't registered a functional update since the 3rd blackout. The walls were dripping, not with water, but with salt. Someone had bled the piping to confuse heat scans. It worked. The cameras missed his entry. He didn't pause, just pressed his palm to the half-rusted keypad beside the maintenance lift. Nothing. Then a soft click, the kind that didn't come from metal, but memory. He stepped inside the lift and let it sink beneath the surface. 1 floor, 2 floors, then into the gridless zone where IDs didn't ping and feed lines ran dark. There, behind a stacked row of decommissioned server racks, was a chair. On it, a metal box no bigger than a shoebox. He opened it without gloves. Inside, a burner node preloaded with a command key labeled in hand-scrawled ink. Thorn, Echo 9. Jason didn't flinch. The last time he'd seen Thorn, the man was digging a hole that didn't have a body in it yet, just coordinates. Now those coordinates were part of a pulse Jason had triggered 2 nights earlier, A pulse that had returned a response routed through an address flagged 9th Street. He connected the burner to the hard line. The screen lit. No menu. No files. Just a single sentence. If she remembers you, they'll come faster. Jason didn't touch the keys. He already knew who she was and what remembering meant. At Precinct 9, 2 floors below the press room, the internal ops division was watching something they weren't supposed to see. An image from a drone feed that wasn't theirs. Jason Statham, not running, not hiding, just standing, holding up a sign with 4 fingers and a bent thumb. Old squad code, not military, not police. But internal clearance that hadn't existed since the Omega Protocol burned itself off the grid. The chief of surveillance leaned back in his chair, fingers hovering above the kill switch for the node that caught the feed. But he didn't press it, because he wasn't sure who else was watching. And lately, hesitation was more dangerous than disobedience. He whispered to the man beside him, low enough that the room didn't catch it. We lost the original. If he's reactivating old code, then we're not just behind. He trailed off. Because on the second monitor, a new feed flickered into view. Not Jason, not now. A girl, maybe 16. Maybe older, walking through the market corridor of 9th Street, holding something in her hand, something that looked like a photo. And the system tagged it as untraceable object ID #redline 51. He didn't have to guess. He already knew they were connected, the ghost and the girl, and if they met, nothing stayed buried. In a utility tunnel beneath Sector 5, Jason paused. The burner in his hand blinked once. Then died. It didn't crash, it cut itself. A dead switch built into the casing, standard Thorn move. Nothing survives reactivation. Jason dropped the phone into the water and kept walking. The tunnel was tight, built for workers half his size, but the walls had been recently patched. Someone had been through here, recently. He moved faster, because the girl wasn't just wandering 9th Street by accident, she was drawing them in, and Jason didn't know if it was by instinct or bait, but either way they'd follow her. Because she was holding the only thing they thought they burned, proof, and proof was the one thing Jason never left behind. She didn't know what she was stepping into. The sidewalk felt too quiet for midday. Cars passed, but slower. Pedestrians walked, but kept their eyes forward. It was like everyone on 9th Street had agreed, silently, not to notice her, not to see the photo in her hand, not to ask why she was following a street number her brother had underlined 5 times in his last notebook. The alley where he'd been set up wasn't far. But that wasn't where she was going, not yet. She passed the bakery with the cracked blue awning, the laundromat with the broken neon, then reached the corner with the camera post, a cheap model designed to stream to cloud-based backups. But this one had a plastic bag tied around its neck. Zip-tied shut. Someone had blinded the system and left it that way. She stopped outside an old hardware store, not open, not closed either, just paused. Like the rest of this street, like this whole part of the city had slipped one foot into a memory it couldn't quite finish walking away from. Then a voice, low and flat, from behind the half-latched door. Inside, quick, she hesitated, just a beat, then stepped in. The door closed, the lock clicked behind her, and Jason Statham turned from the shadows. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, not in suspicion but recognition. Not that he knew her, but he knew what it meant that she was here now, holding that photo without trembling. She held it out, didn't blink, didn't flinch, and in her other hand, barely visible, a folded paper marked with coordinates she didn't understand. But Jason did. Because he'd written them, 12 years ago, and buried them in a place only someone on the inside could have retrieved, which meant he took the paper gently, examined the edges, saw the trace burn mark from a thermal scrubber, and knew 2 things instantly. She wasn't just here because of her brother, she was part of this, even if she didn't know it yet. The room was cold. Old wiring hummed through the walls like distant applause, scattered, wrong, and too loud for how little power was actually running. Jason didn't trust the building, didn't trust the silence either, but he trusted the girl now, not because she was safe, but because she had something the system thought was destroyed. She watched him move, not fast, just exact. Every action pre-decided, every motion minimized, like he'd been living between seconds for years and didn't know how to return to regular time. He opened a case under the floorboard. Not large, not secure, but inside, 3 devices, none of them digital. One was an old voice decoder, analog, rotary, modified for encrypted playback from microtapes. He inserted one marked with the sigil of a dead unit. The tape didn't play, it spun, but no sound came out, until Jason tapped once on the metal casing. The speaker clicked, then hissed. Then a voice, fragmented, chopped, but real, talking about Ninth Street, about a shadow grid used to test behavioral compliance models across pseudo-precincts, and about a target, not a terrorist, not a suspect, but a social interference node. That was the label they'd used for Jason. He wasn't an agent anymore. He was an experiment, and the moment he'd walked off-grid, they didn't delete him. They classified him as error code not for who he was, but what he represented, proof of failed control. 2 miles east, in a rooftop bunker no longer on the map, a former handler named Merrick watched the drone feed spin through their loop cycles. Jason had gone dark again, but the girl had surfaced. That was worse, because girls like her weren't meant to live long enough to become variables. Merrick keyed into a sealed archive and reviewed the last flagged file under the Omega misfire logs. Subject: Redline 51, her baby photo, barcode clear, tag matched to a civilian control group out of Sector 2B, thought dissolved. Apparently not. He pressed a finger against the display and whispered to no one. She met him. Then clicked the intercom button embedded in the panel, spoke a code that hadn't been used in years, and activated a protocol no longer acknowledged by the agency, contained with empathy. Because that girl wasn't to be erased, she was to be reabsorbed, and Jason was to be extracted, not killed, not yet. First, he needed to remember why he disappeared in the first place. Back in the hardware store, the girl stared at Jason without fear. He finally asked, through narration more than voice, how she found the coordinates. She shrugged, said her brother used to trace drawings from their father's war journals. She thought it was a game. Turns out it was training. Jason didn't react, but inside something shifted. Because he remembered that training, he was part of it, and if her brother had passed it on, then her father wasn't just a casualty. He was crew, one of his, long burned, but not forgotten. Jason looked at the girl again, longer this time. She didn't have the posture of someone running. She had the posture of someone ready. And for the first time in weeks, Jason allowed a new tactic into the fold: collaboration. Because if they'd tried to overwrite her and failed, she was the proof he needed, not to the public, to the others, the ghosts who were still hiding, still afraid. He handed her back the photo. She took it, said nothing, but her grip on it was firm, like it mattered, like she understood. Jason keyed open the wall panel behind the shelf and revealed the short corridor he'd built months ago, back when the city still slept through corruption. He motioned her in. She didn't hesitate, and as the door closed behind them, 9th Street went quiet again. Too quiet, because someone had just erased every traffic camera for 4 blocks, not to hide Jason, to isolate the cop who'd been watching the building, and now that cop wasn't answering his comms. The hallway wasn't long, but it felt like it had no end. She walked just behind Jason Statham, watching the back of a man who didn't seem to breathe wrong, didn't flinch at sound, didn't hesitate except when they passed the broken light. That's where he stopped, only for a second. Then pressed 2 fingers to the flickering panel on the wall, like he was feeling its rhythm. He was. The power grid in this corridor wasn't random. It was tuned, coded in alternating pulse lengths. Old squad tech, cheap, obsolete, but impossible to track unless you already knew the pattern. And Jason Statham had built it himself. The light flickered. Short, long, short pause, a message. One that didn't come from this building. He stepped aside. Let her walk through first. The room beyond was smaller than she expected, tighter, a wall of metal racks. Shelves full of blacked-out drives, some tagged with serials that had clearly been etched over more than once. No chairs, no cameras, just a cable, one cable, dangling from the ceiling like a question mark made of wire. Jason reached for it, didn't connect it, just held it. It hummed slightly, enough to let him know it was live, but not secure. Then he let it swing. The girl stood behind him now, watching. He didn't turn, but he spoke, not to her, to the space, to whatever was listening. They've already burned this grid once. The room replied with silence. But the cable stopped swinging, and that was enough. Someone was on the other end, someone old, someone waiting. 10 blocks south, in the boiler room of a condemned transit tower, an ex-operative named Voss sat on a flipped shopping cart, chewing the end of a plastic straw. The screen in front of him cracked, stained, lit up with a symbol, not a message, not even a file, just the sigil, Jason's. It was faint, Almost too faint to see, but Voss had been watching for it. 12 years. No signals, no codes, no pulses. Now, in under a week, 2 pings. He set the straw down, stood, walked over to a filing cabinet with the top drawer welded shut. The bottom one wasn't. Inside, a black ring case and a burner phone still wrapped in foil. He powered it up, waited. The signal didn't come through the towers. It came underground, via city loop power feeds most people thought had been scrapped after the blackout. But Jason hadn't scrapped them. He rerouted them, built a relay structure beneath the old water map, one tied not to GPS, but to emotional resonance keys. Which meant Voss held the phone tighter, because this wasn't just Jason reaching out, it was Jason choosing who remembered him. Back in the corridor, Jason sat against the wall now, hands wrapped around his knees, eyes closed. The girl didn't ask why. She understood it without words. Sometimes silence was safer than stories. The cable above him buzzed once more, then again. A tone shift, encrypted Morse. But embedded with an image key, Jason's eyes snapped open, not because he was surprised, because he wasn't expecting her. The face on the screen, the one someone else just sent back to him, was the woman from the school photo, not the girl, her mother, and behind her in the blurred distance of the image, Callan Rush, alive. Again, but this time, not speaking into a camera, this time watching her. And that changed everything, because Jason had circled Callan's last known location on the map 2 days ago. That was Glass Channel, but this new image wasn't from the channel. It was from 9th Street, which meant Callan Rush had moved, or been moved. And if the girl's mother was near him, willingly or not, then Jason wasn't just tracking a unit. He was tracing a test sequence. At that same moment, across the city's forgotten industrial belt, a man in city maintenance gear walked into a lunchroom with no cameras. The other men didn't look up. They were watching something, footage from inside a precinct holding cell, not live, but recent. It showed a man in tactical uniform passed out against the wall. Except he wasn't passed out, he was gone, eyes open, mouth parted, no pulse, no wounds. Nothing to explain how he vanished, because that's what this was now, not just erasure, vanishing. One of them said it aloud, not a warning, a fact. Jason pulled the Omega cut. The others didn't respond, because that cut wasn't just a tactic, it was a curse. It meant someone had died in a way the system couldn't explain, and when Jason used that cut, it always meant the same thing. That person didn't just matter. They betrayed. The girl crouched beside Jason now, asked the only question that mattered, who's she watching? Jason didn't answer at first, then handed her a small black square. It looked like a mirror, but it wasn't. It was a reflection tracker, one that could only replay visual feeds it had been exposed to in the last 24 hours. She held it up to the photo, waited. The surface shimmered. Then settled. Now a video. The same woman, same sidewalk. But she wasn't walking past Callan, she was waiting for him, holding out her hand, and on her wrist a matching barcode, not burned in, tattooed, permanent. Jason stood, not suddenly, not fast, but with the weight of someone who now understood the test wasn't over, it had just evolved. In a dark room lined with noise-dampening foam, a man wearing Jason's face sat at a table covered in microchips and vocal training data. He wasn't breathing heavy, but he wasn't at rest. He was learning. In fast loops, Jason's posture, Jason's voice inflection, Jason's gaze and resistance signals. But the screen in front of him paused suddenly. New file loading, a photo of the girl, not the one Jason found, the one who found him, and below it a file tag, unverified legacy, do not engage. Observe only. But he didn't follow that command. He touched the screen and whispered her name, which meant the replication process was failing, because the copy wasn't just absorbing, it was remembering, and Jason wasn't the only ghost waking up. The man on patrol didn't know his badge wasn't real. He thought he'd earned it, came from a good precinct, transferred in, clean record, spoke to his neighbors, took night shifts no one wanted. He even paid for his own vest upgrade when the department dragged its feet on requisitions. But what he didn't know, couldn't know, was that his uniform template had been pulled from an old domestic containment op. The patch was one character off from regulation. The weapon he carried had a tracking beacon hard-coded to a separate network. And the entire sector he was assigned to was designed to look public but wasn't. Sector Echo 9. It was a loop, a behavioral test zone, and tonight he was the subject. At exactly 21:00 his comms died, not loud, Not glitched, just gone, no hum, no feedback, no tone. The kind of silence that doesn't alert you, it lulls you. He tapped the mic, nothing, checked his wrist device, blank. Turned toward the street monitor, one of the cameras mounted above a crosswalk. It blinked once, then again, then stopped following him. That was wrong. The camera always tracked motion. It wasn't supposed to look away. He paused beneath it, looked up, frowned, then felt it. Not a presence, an absence. Behind him across the street, the lights in a sandwich shop dimmed. He turned toward it. Nothing moved inside. But he swore he crossed the street anyway, pressed his face to the glass, just shelves, a counter, a few plastic chairs, but the back door, it was open. He moved inside, called it in or tried, still nothing, walked past the counter, checked the kitchen, nothing, then reached the rear exit. Paused, because on the floor, etched into the tile by something sharp, were 3 digits, 03. He looked down, confused. That wasn't a room number, wasn't a case file, it was a unit code, Jason's. He stepped back, uneasy now, but it was too late. Outside, on the opposite rooftop, Jason watched him disappear, not physically, not like teleportation or shadow play, but digitally. The man's badge number disappeared from the precinct grid first, then his personnel file, then his recruitment records, one by one. Until the database showed nothing, like he'd never worn the uniform, never filed a report, never existed. Jason whispered 2 words, low, steady. And the girl standing beside him repeated them, confused. Protocol, shame. Jason didn't nod, didn't explain, because there wasn't time. That officer hadn't been erased for guilt, he'd been erased for doubt, and that was worse, because it meant the system was no longer deleting threats, it was deleting hesitation. Back in the control room beneath District 7, 2 analysts stared at a frozen screen. They weren't rookies. One had worked cleanup on rogue drone ops. The other had rebuilt intelligence profiles during the migration riots, but neither of them had ever seen this. A uniformed officer mid-shift, live feed rolling, then glitch, then freeze, then static, gone. The chair hadn't moved. The patrol route was still logged, but the man was gone, no resignation letter, just void. The older analyst leaned forward, rewound the feed, played it again, still nothing. But when he paused on frame #4412, he saw it. In the mirror behind the man, just for a blink, Jason Statham, watching, not interfering, not threatening, just witnessing. And that was the worst part, because the protocol only triggered if a high-level override was in the room. Jason had become the override. On the rooftop, Jason lowered his binoculars, spoke without turning his head. Now they know. The girl stayed silent. He didn't need her to answer. She wasn't asking questions anymore. She was tracking patterns. Her eyes weren't wide with shock now. They were focused. Reading data loops Jason projected onto the portable glass from his coat, learning in real time. She pointed to one file as it blinked red, the erased officer's name. Then another, a precinct supervisor tagged for reassignment. Jason tapped it. The file expanded. Showed timestamps, case history, badge inconsistencies, and at the bottom, a hidden file, visible only because Jason had built the software that tried to bury it. He decrypted it in seconds, then handed her the screen on it, photo of her brother, months before the alley setup, sitting at a table. Not alone, with a man Jason recognized instantly, Callan Rush, same wristband, same ring, same lie, and in the background, a file folder with 2 words stamped in red, field seed. Jason whispered, "They didn't target your brother because he spoke out." The girl turned to him slowly. Eyes burning now. They targeted him because he was a control. 10 blocks west, a councilwoman's assistant deleted a file she wasn't supposed to open, then deleted the trash bin, then broke the drive in half with her boot, because what she saw inside wasn't just surveillance, it was planning. Mapped arrests, planted evidence. Civilian behavioral metrics used to nudge panic, not stop it. Nudge it, the face on the first page, Jason Statham, labeled imperfect asset. The second, the girl's, labeled legacy echo, disconnected. And the last, a blank outline with a barcode on the neck. Labeled replacement in progress. She stepped back from the desk, shaking, because she wasn't a whistleblower. She was just supposed to handle schedules. And now she was holding a piece of something she could never explain. She opened her phone, typed one sentence into the search bar. Then hesitated. The words, protocol, shame. What is it? The screen went black, no warning, just shutdown. Her phone died in her hands. She didn't reboot it. She walked out of the office and never returned. Back on the rooftop, Jason slid the glass terminal back into his coat. The girl asked if the man from the sandwich shop would come back. Jason didn't lie, didn't soften it. He was overwritten. She didn't cry, didn't blink, just nodded once, then asked how many more like him. Jason didn't answer. Instead, he pointed across the skyline to a building marked for demolition 2 years ago, still standing, still silent, because someone had repurposed the wiring. That was where they'd go next, because that's where the replacement frame was being stored. And Jason wasn't going to wait for it to activate, not this time. He turned to the girl, motioned her forward, but before they moved, she asked him something else, not about the city, not about the war, not about the system, about herself. If they used me, why didn't they finish it? Jason paused. The wind passed. He answered slowly, because this part mattered, because some memories reject programming. And then he turned toward the edge of the rooftop and dropped down the fire escape. She followed, not because he told her to, because now she wanted to remember everything. The street smelled like old oil and carnival sugar. East 19th and Archer, a plaza the city pretended was under renovation. But no construction crews worked here. Just low-end merchants and unwatched cameras, a hollow place in plain sight. Jason stood at the edge, leaning against a cracked billboard covered in adhesive layers of lost messages. He wore no mask, no hood, just presence. That was enough, because he wasn't here to hide, he was here to bait. The footage drop had been primed for 12 hours. Released in pieces, not through one account but hundreds. Fragments stitched together from fake news alerts, public testimonies, and crowd videos. Each barely a minute long. None fully clear. Until now, at exactly 0800, all feeds synced, public squares, transit hubs, in-office kiosks, broken phones connected to old networks. And across every screen, Jason Statham appeared, walking calmly beside a uniformed officer, the same man who vanished the night before. But in the footage, Jason wasn't attacking him. He was protecting him, talking, walking him away from a building tagged for replacement testing. Then, the footage zoomed, and for the first time the public saw the officer's wrist, scarred, tattooed, barcode visible beneath the cuff. It wasn't human code. It was control sequence metadata, the kind used in trial assets before personality integration. The kind no one had ever publicly confirmed, until now. Inside a high-rise tower near District 6, a council aide dropped his coffee, didn't clean it, didn't look down. He was staring at the same screen everyone else was, but he understood what others didn't. The badge on that officer in the video, it wasn't current. It was from a cancelled precinct, one that had never officially opened, the precinct from Project Veil, the one no one was supposed to speak of. He stepped away from his desk, opened a locked drawer inside, a pre-burned phone. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 6 years, didn't speak when it picked up, just said the phrase, "Protocol shame has aired," then hung up. That would be enough. He was no longer in control. But he had triggered the people who were. Back at the plaza, Jason watched the crowd around him change in slow motion. Not panic, not chaos, something worse. Recognition. Not everyone saw the footage. Not everyone needed to. A handful of people across the square began whispering. Some stepped back, some stepped forward. One man pulled out his phone, snapped a picture, then stopped halfway, because Jason didn't move, didn't pose, didn't retreat. Just turned toward the man with the phone and looked at him like he already knew what app he was using. The phone shut off in the man's hand. Dead battery, maybe, or maybe not. Jason turned again, started walking, not away, but toward the corner market where 3 uniformed officers were posted outside for what looked like casual patrol. They didn't know, not yet, but they would. In a bunker 4 levels below the Public Integrity Tribunal, a woman named Larine Holt watched her face appear on a screen she didn't turn on. She was middle admin, managed budget reallocations. She had nothing to do with surveillance, except once, 10 years ago.
A reroute request came through her desk asking for equipment to be moved from Sector 3 to a testing zone in Southridge. She denied it. That's all. Just denial. And 2 days later, her department logged a ghost override, something that approved the transfer anyway. She never spoke of it. Didn't follow up. But now, her denial request was on the screen, next to Jason Statham's image, overlaid, linked, labeled. Larine Holt, barrier node #11, non-compliant asset. She didn't understand, didn't know who was flagging her. But the implication was clear. Someone thought she'd help Jason, and now they were showing her the proof. Before someone else could erase it, she backed away. Because once your face was linked to his, you didn't get a warning. You got tested. At the market entrance, the officers straightened up as Jason approached. One reached for his shoulder mic. Didn't work. Another went for his belt alarm, silent. Jason stopped 3 feet away, raised his hands, not in surrender, but like a showman. Like someone about to announce the truth with no amplification needed. He didn't speak, didn't need to, because behind the officers, inside the glass of the storefront, their own reflection showed something they hadn't noticed. They were all wearing badges with different numbers. Slightly different fonts, misaligned threading, the kind of details that fall apart when the mirror's too clean. One of them turned, noticed the inconsistency, blinked, looked at his arm, then at Jason, not fear, understanding. Jason nodded once, not to reassure, to confirm. They weren't real officers, they weren't even imposters, they were replacements, scripted, seeded, slowly trained into roles until they believed they'd earned them. Jason reached into his coat, pulled out a drive, held it out, didn't press play. Let the weight of it do the talking. The officer who'd noticed the badge variation took a step forward, hesitated, then took it. The others didn't stop him, because something had broken in the code, doubt. And that was all Jason needed. Across the plaza, the girl stood in the shade of a boarded kiosk, watching. No camera, no mask, no backup, just memory. She saw what Jason had done, not just in the moment, but in the method. He hadn't exposed a fraud. He'd made the system reveal it to itself. And now she reached into her pocket, pulled out her own copy of the footage, but not the public one. A raw cut Jason had given her the night before. She tapped send, one address, not broadcast, targeted. The recipient, a mid-range tech manager inside the Behavioral Enforcement Bureau, someone who'd once worked with her mother, and if she was right, he'd open it, and everything would change. By 9:10 a.m., the plaza was empty, not by order, not by force, by instinct. The footage hadn't gone viral in the traditional sense. No hashtags, no debates, no trending outrage. It spread under the net, through side channels, forgotten subreddits, old Darkline FTPs. Peer-to-peer exchanges where no one asked, "Is this real?" They asked, "Why didn't we see it sooner?" And somewhere between the digital bleed and the slow-building tension of recognition, something shifted. People didn't run from Jason Statham. They started walking away from anyone wearing a badge. It wasn't fear of the uniform anymore. It was doubt in the one behind it. On the fourth floor of a mid-rise 6 blocks west, a woman sat at her desk holding a drive she hadn't asked for. The one the girl had sent. It didn't come with a message, no name, no subject line, just one file. Look closer, variant 13. She didn't open it on her work terminal, didn't risk traceback. She pulled an old burner from her bottom drawer, powered it with a private grid cell, and waited for the file to unpack. When it did, her breath caught. Not because of what she saw, because of who she saw. Her own signature on a training form for asset conditioning dated 11 years ago, a form she swore had been purged. But this wasn't just a copy. It was annotated by someone else. Lines drawn through her justifications. Notes about deviation tolerance. A final line she'd never seen. Subject resisted total overwrite. Partial memory immunity. Must not be tagged for follow-up. She didn't know which subject it meant, but the overlaid image showed a teenager. And that face matched the girl on the plaza, the one standing behind Jason hours earlier. That meant one thing: this wasn't about Jason anymore. It was about her, the one they missed, and someone out there wanted her to remember. 2 floors beneath the plaza, in a concrete bunker disguised as a utility substation, a conversation was unfolding without sound. 3 men. No uniforms. 2 armed, one not. The man without the gun was talking fast, hands in the air, explaining a theory that Jason wasn't just exposing assets, he was activating sleepers, old agents, buried test subjects, people who never completed integration and were left to vanish into the population. If even a handful started waking up, one of the armed men cut him off, lifted a tablet on screen. Facial scan from the market storefront. Jason Statham, 94% match. But the timecode didn't match the public drop. It was 15 minutes ahead, which meant someone inside the system had released the feed before the plaza moment ever happened, which meant Jason wasn't reacting, he was orchestrating. That's when the lights flickered, the tablet died, and from the back wall, once sealed with steel, a panel slid open. No explosion. No sparks, just surrender. Because that door didn't open because of force, it opened because of code, old code, Jason's code. Back above ground, Jason moved through a quiet street lined with shuttered shops and blind windows. He wasn't rushing. The girl was with him, still silent. She hadn't asked what the drive contained, the one the officer took at the storefront. She didn't need to. She'd seen enough now to know the pattern. Jason never handed someone a truth they weren't ready to destroy themselves. They walked until they reached the underpass, an old train loop once used for maintenance reroutes. Jason stepped over the barrier without pause. She followed. Inside, at the far end, a keypad glowed faintly beside an elevator door rusted shut. Jason didn't touch the pad. He removed a piece of chalk from his coat and scratched 5 digits into the wall beside it, then stepped back. The elevator hummed, not opened, hummed, a different kind of signal, and behind them the wall they'd just passed clicked once, then opened, not the elevator, the wall. Behind it, a single chair, a folded screen, and a cracked nameplate. She picked it up, read the name, didn't recognize it. Jason did. The first operative ever removed for asking why. A man erased before the Omega list was even created. The man who wrote the first field manual on humiliation warfare, and that manual was now sitting in the chair, folded, scarred, but intact. Jason handed it to the girl and said nothing, because this next part wasn't for him, it was for her. She sat down, opened the first page, and started reading. Across the city grid, reactions began to spike, small ones. One teacher walked out of a classroom mid-lecture. A janitor stopped pushing his mop, stared at a ceiling vent, and walked off the job. 2 street vendors at opposite ends of the city turned their radios to the same pirate frequency without knowing each other's names. None of them said Jason's name aloud. They didn't have to, because this was not a revolution. It was a reset. The world was already built wrong. Jason was just pulling the thread. At a broadcast station near the waterline, an emergency override was issued. Untraceable source, no IP, no credentials, just one line of command code: deploy variant 5. The technician didn't question it. He keyed in the release. A 30-second montage loaded into the live cycle, all verified, all tagged, but the audio feed corrupted. Instead of voiceover, it was Jason's voice from an 11-year-old field recording. You can't reprogram a soul that knows where it started. The montage played. And across every screen that still hadn't gone black, the illusion cracked a little more. Back in the underpass chamber, the girl reached the final page of the manual, a postscript, handwritten. The first lie they teach you is that you were broken before they found you, but you weren't broken. You were aware. She closed the book, handed it to Jason. He didn't take it, just looked at her, waiting. And when she asked the question, the only one that mattered now, he finally answered. She said, "How do we make them see?" He replied, "We don't. We make them doubt." And then the elevator behind them opened. No button pressed, no command given, just access granted, because someone up top had just switched sides. And the next target wasn't a precinct, it was the memory bank. The elevator didn't hum like a modern machine. It groaned. Slow, industrial, the kind of sound metal makes when it remembers too much. The girl stepped in first. Jason followed. Neither of them touched the panel. There were no buttons, only a slot. Jason reached into his coat and pulled out the broken badge of the vanished officer. Not a souvenir. A key. He slid it into the slot. The elevator didn't move. The walls did. Rotated, not fast, but with finality. And now they were no longer in a service shaft. They were inside a vertical memory vault, a relic of the city's deep archive structure, used decades ago for housing analog black box recordings. The girl said nothing. Jason scanned the perimeter. No cameras, no logs, no ambient signal detection. That's how he knew who built it. Thorne, not the handler, the rebuilder, the man who once rewrote identities not to hide people, but to remind them who they used to be. And now, Jason wasn't sure if he was ally, or proof the system had already learned how to mimic remorse. 6 floors above, inside a surveillance-proof room buried in the city's legal registrar, Thorne opened a file he hadn't touched in 10 years. It was still warm. That was the first warning. The second. The system had added pages he didn't write, redacted lines, replacement pages, images. One of them, Jason Statham, 12 years younger with a different name and a scar that never existed. Another, the girl 3 years old, holding a field manual not yet published. And in the margins, a handwritten word in green ink, re-entry. He stood up. The room's lights dimmed. A pulse clicked in the wall. Someone else had just accessed the same file from below. Jason. Thorne pulled the emergency cable, hardwired to a voice-only channel. Didn't say a name, just breathed into it. Once. Jason would hear it. He built the listener himself, and he'd know that breath. It wasn't threat, it was summons. Back in the shaft, Jason heard it, didn't flinch. The girl didn't ask. She was learning the tempo now, and silence was louder than any alarm. The elevator shifted again. This time down, 1 floor, 2, then stopped. The door opened into cold white, no lights, just ambient glow from recessed panels. And there in the center of the room was a table, 2 seats, and on the table a field recorder, cassette-based, still running. Jason walked to it, pressed rewind. Let it click back, then play, and the voice that spoke wasn't his, wasn't Thorne's. It was Callan Rush, breathing hard, speaking fast. If Jason hears this before they intercept me, it means Thorne opened the failsafe. It means we didn't bury him deep enough. You're looking for the girl, I know. I was too, but she's not the variable anymore. She's the anchor, the map's in her, they built it that way. Thorne will deny it, not because he's lying, but because they made him forget. That's the new patch cycle. Remorse isn't real, it's planted. Then static. Jason stopped the tape. Looked at the girl. She didn't blink, didn't frown. She just said, "So who's telling the truth?" Jason replied without pause. "Whoever loses the most." Across the city, beneath a stack of inactive gridline transformers, a different kind of meeting was happening. 3 people, all ghosts. 2 from Jason's past unit, 1 from his training phase. They weren't loyal to the current grid, but they weren't loyal to Jason either. They were loyal to one thing, continuity. And Jason, in their eyes, had broken it by surfacing, by baiting the system into revealing itself. They didn't want the world exposed. They wanted the world to keep functioning, even broken, because broken routines still feed families, still keep light on, still move bodies through doors. Jason's reset risked all of that, and so they voted not on his guilt, but on his replacement. They unlocked the backup profile, loaded it into the prep frame. The digital twin flickered to life, faceless for now, but primed, awaiting only one thing: the moment Jason made a choice Thorne wouldn't approve of. In the archive chamber, the girl stood by the wall, running her fingers along the etched names barely visible in the plaster. Every one of them a fallback ID, Everyone burned years ago, but hers wasn't there, which meant she'd never been erased, just paused. She turned to Jason. "What if they used me to lure you?" Jason nodded. "They did. And you came anyway. I was already here." Her face didn't change, but something inside her did. She walked to the recorder, pressed play again. Listened to the voice of a man she didn't know, Callan Rush, talk about her like she was a map, not a person, not a risk, a function. She looked at Jason. "I'm not a map." Jason said nothing. But in his silence was the only real truth she'd heard all day. And that truth was this: they were all made into something once. But what mattered now was what they became after. The recorder beeped, side B. Jason pressed it. This time the voice wasn't Callan, it was Thorne, clear, direct. "Jason, if you're hearing this, then you know I'm not what I was. But if I'm compromised, then this is the last safeguard I can give you. There's a vault under District 3, not tagged, not mapped. It's where the first protocols were tested, the ones that didn't just break memory, they rewrote origin. You need to go there, but not alone. She has to come too, because the key isn't a code. It's biometric guilt, and only someone they used without success can trigger it." The recorder clicked off. Jason stood, didn't speak, just turned to the girl. She nodded, and the room's final panel opened, not a door, a stairwell. Leading down, always down, because memory doesn't surface by accident, it's dragged back up, one step at a time. The stairwell was narrow, built for people who weren't supposed to climb back up. Jason led. The girl followed. Her boots scraped the metal, but she didn't slow. There was no handrail. Just exposed concrete, condensation, and the silence of a place designed to hold things memory couldn't. She didn't speak. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew if she started asking questions, she might not want the answers. Halfway down, Jason paused. He crouched. Touched the wall with his palm, not to push, to feel faint warmth. Barely there, the vault wasn't sealed, it was alive, still running. 2 levels beneath them, the room flickered on, not from motion, from signal. A heartbeat logged in, not Jason's, theirs. Thorne's override protocol had activated the vault's biometric prep sequence. The system didn't know who it had accepted, only that someone genetically tethered to the original testing batch had crossed the threshold. The girl. Her presence wasn't optional. It was the key. The system ran the welcome loop, loaded the presentation script, spun up the recording from 12 years ago. It didn't play yet. It waited. Because guilt recognition requires a trigger, and Jason was about to be shown a memory he didn't know he had. At the top of the stairwell, a camera blinked. It wasn't local, not municipal. This one belonged to the replacement handler group, the ones who believed continuity mattered more than truth. They just received the activation ping, vault open, Jason inside, the girl with him. And the countdown to full overwrite was already on screen, 30 minutes. That's how long they had until the system tagged them both as redline operational, which meant exposure or replacement. They issued the command, deploy variant Statham. Live field confirmation. And down in the transit district, one of the vaults hissed open. The copy stepped out, hair shorter, scar cleaner, movements rehearsed to the millimeter, emotionless but fluent. He didn't need to fake Jason. He was the version designed to carry the story further without doubt, without error, without memory. He looked up into the fog and walked toward the crowd. Inside the vault, the girl touched the glass. It was warm. The center table lit up. 3 objects. 1, a small vial, clear, no label. 2, a folded document marked Exposure Model, Subject J. 3, a child's bracelet, plastic, blue, snapped. She looked at Jason. He didn't reach for the bracelet, didn't move, just stared. Because something about it fractured his posture. He wasn't remembering, he was recognizing. And recognition is harder than memory. The screen in front of them flickered. A projection of Jason, age 26, appeared. Younger, still in uniform, sitting across from a child. The video had no audio, but the tension was clear. The child cried. Jason didn't flinch. He offered something. his hand. And then the bracelet, that same blue plastic, the feed cut. Jason closed his eyes. Hard, the girl watched his face, then picked up the document inside. Lines of analysis, not about her, about him. Subject demonstrates high containment threshold, fails empathy metrics during stress protocols. Potential candidate for humiliation modeling phase B. Family-seated interactions ineffective. Refuses memory collapse. Recommendation: assign guilt proxy. Jason took the paper from her, read it again, didn't speak, then looked up, because the screen had changed again. Now it was her on the screen, as a toddler, wearing the bracelet, Jason standing behind her, not in focus, but there, watching, hands at his side, expression blank. And the girl said the words he never thought he'd hear from anyone else. They used me against you. Across the city, the variant moved into position. The plaza, same location Jason had used before, same bench, same angle to the main feed tower. He sat, pulled up a paper, a mimic of calm. The cameras blinked, focused. They read his posture as identical, his voice ready to launch. But what they didn't realize, people were watching differently now, and one woman, the teacher who left mid-lesson, paused across the street, looked once, then again, then frowned, because something was off. It wasn't the face, it was the stillness. Jason was always quiet, but never still. Stillness was programmed. She turned and walked away, quietly uploaded a clip to the peer grid, captioned it, "Look closely. That's not the man from the footage." Within 6 minutes, 3 dozen replays emerged, all noting micro-expressions the variant didn't have. And back in the handler center, the screens lit red. Someone had noticed, too early. The variant wasn't fooling them, and now their asset wasn't gaining control, he was compromising it. Inside the vault, Jason sat now, the bracelet in one hand, the girl by the console. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because what played next wasn't footage, it was a voice, synthetic, but pulled from Jason's own speech patterns, talking back to them, reciting an order never given. Begin Phase 3. If legacy resists collapse, initiate replacement narrative using embedded anchor. Redline test subject, confirmed live. Statham profile will remain active only if self-termination proceeds. Otherwise, activate variant and absorb fallout. The girl looked at him, not afraid, just sure. You were meant to fail. Jason opened his eyes, looked at her like she wasn't a survivor, but a signal. Then he stood, walked to the console, pressed the red button at its base. Confirm self-termination. The system waited. Jason didn't finish the command. He pressed cancel. The voice paused, then glitched. That wasn't protocol. And outside, every digital feed with Jason's face flickered. For a second, 2 versions overlapped, one still, one breathing. And the world blinked, because the moment you show people a copy, they start wondering who the original really was. Up above, Thorne watched the feed collapse, smiled. Not because the plan worked, but because the variant didn't. And if a fake can't mimic doubt, then maybe doubt was the one human trait they couldn't code. He shut down the server, deleted his name from the registry, and vanished, for now, because Jason wasn't done. He was just confirmed by the only system that mattered, the people. On our last episode, Jason Statham didn't just survive another vault, he survived his own replacement. The girl they used to test his guilt stood beside him as the system failed to overwrite him. Not because he fought back, but because he refused to comply. Above ground, his variant mimicked him to the pixel, but the crowd noticed what the machine didn't: real Jason doubts. And that's what made him real. People talk about betrayal like it's loud, a slam of a door, a scream in the rain, a siren that doesn't stop. But the most dangerous kind doesn't make noise. It comes in the form of silence, a name not called, a door left open when it should have been locked, a face turned away when everything depended on being seen. Jason Statham had seen that kind of betrayal before. He just didn't know it would come again from someone who used to wear the same ring. The girl didn't speak as they exited the vault, but she didn't look back either. That mattered. Jason did, just once. Not for sentiment, for signal. The vault lights blinked twice before powering down. That was enough. Somewhere on a backup node deep in the city grid, a dead terminal flickered to life. It didn't display his name, just a phrase. Asset refused termination. And someone on the far end didn't like that. 5 blocks from the old reactor zone, a crowd had formed. Small at first, just a few commuters near the plaza where Jason's variant still sat pretending to read. Then larger. They weren't filming, not yet. They were watching, noticing, because something about him felt too rehearsed, the way he breathed only when necessary, the way he didn't scan the edges of the crowd, the way his eyes didn't move unless prompted by sound. People didn't need training to feel off. They just needed time. And by the time the third person whispered, "That's not him," it was already spreading faster than the handler group could isolate. The variant blinked, adjusted posture, didn't speak, didn't move, didn't improvise. And that was the flaw. Jason always improvised, even when he was wrong. Especially when he was wrong. Half a mile away, beneath an abandoned commuter rail station, Jason and the girl reached an exit hatch hidden behind a utility scaffold. He didn't key it open. He knocked. Twice, then once, then 3 rapid. The grate slid. A woman opened it, same one from East 17th with the burnt sleeves and thick braids. She didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside. Jason nodded. The girl entered first. Inside was a narrow hallway stacked with stripped tech, amps, coils, old relay ports long off-grid but still humming if wired right. At the end, a chair. Not for resting, for scanning. The woman gestured. The girl sat. No hesitation. Jason didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. They were checking for one thing, residual control markers, the kind injected into the skin during early-phase civilian trials. The kind they pretended didn't exist. The scanner took 6 seconds. It beeped once. Then once more. The screen flashed red. She'd been tagged. But the tag was dormant. That was worse. Because dormant meant waiting. Waiting to be activated by a frequency Jason had once helped write. He looked at the woman. She looked back. Didn't speak. Just handed him a cord. It led into a vault drive buried in the floor, not wireless. Jason crouched, plugged it in, and the feed started loading, line by line. And there, near the bottom, a file labeled JS, override // daughter 004 V. Jason didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted. She wasn't just used against him. She was built around him. Up in the plaza, the crowd had started filming, not with shouts or confrontation, with angles, side shots, close zooms. Comparisons to older footage, Jason laughing once, Jason running, Jason bleeding, Jason staring down riot police, and this one just sitting, perfectly composed. Too perfect. By the 7th comparison, the peer grid had already broken the footage apart. One shared comment summed it up. The real Jason doesn't freeze, he flexes. That wasn't metaphor, it was biometric. Real Jason's jaw ticks under pressure, always has. The variant didn't even blink. The damage was done, and the people who built the variant knew it. Back in the rail hideout, Jason uploaded a patch into the corded vault. It wasn't a deletion. It was a redirect. Any activation signal aimed at her would bounce, not jammed, not blocked, reassigned. To a shadow profile Jason just built. Echo proxy. Meaning, if they tried to turn her on, they'd end up exposing their whole command string instead. He stood, looked at the girl. She nodded once. No fear, just alignment. And that's what scared Jason more than anything. Because she shouldn't have had to learn that kind of loyalty this young. But in this city, it wasn't learned. It was inherited. Across the city, in a van parked 3 levels beneath a traffic loop, a small team of unbadged operators watched the peer grid explode with Jason posts. They didn't panic, they just switched tactics. If the variant couldn't control the narrative, then the real Jason had to be erased in real time, but not quietly, publicly, so they spun up the old protocol. The one Jason had named years ago as a joke, Protocol shame. Expose him. Bait him, force him into visibility. Then overwrite the story with enough noise, no one remembers the truth. Except Jason had already seen this move, because he invented it. And this time, he wasn't going to duck the camera, he was going to face it. And make sure the story wasn't theirs anymore. Somewhere beneath the eastern grid, under a maintenance deck older than the city's zoning records, Jason Statham moved with quiet calculation, not hiding, not running, just redirecting. Above ground, they thought they'd beaten him with a clone and a crowd. But Jason wasn't trying to win the street, he was rewiring the source. He didn't speak to the girl. Not yet. She wasn't just recovering, she was processing. Her breathing was even, but her posture told a different story. Hands half-clenched, shoulders square. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She was calibrating for what came next. That was how Jason had once been, and the fact it mirrored back through someone half his age meant whatever they had planned for her wasn't over. Not even close. The rail hideout began to vibrate, faintly, but enough to trigger an old pressure sensor embedded in the floor under the vault deck. It wasn't a threat. It was a pattern. Jason stepped toward the sensor, removed the slotted panel, and pulled up a matte black case. Inside, a pulse-tagged microdrive sealed in ceramic. One he'd buried years ago under a false alias tied to a life he'd legally severed. The drive had no labels, no lights. But Jason remembered the coordinates he'd linked it to: South Grid, Zone D, Echo Tower. It wasn't an actual tower. It was a buried substation once used to mirror telecom feeds during insurgency drills. Now it was scrubbed from maps, turned to lore. But Jason knew it hadn't been deleted, just redirected, and he'd just reactivated its spine. Elsewhere in the city, beneath the glossy hum of Precinct 5 Secure Comms Bay, a supervisor leaned over his desk as two mirrored feeds played side by side. Left, Jason Statham in the fog, glaring at the drone. Right, Jason Statham in the plaza, sitting like a mannequin in bad lighting. Same face, different frequency. And that's what gave it away, not to civilians, to operators. The variant didn't sweat, didn't radiate thermal variance beyond default temps. Jason's signature had always spiked at 2 moments, pressure and regret. The variant had neither. And someone up the chain finally noticed. Back at the hideout, the woman with the burnt sleeves dropped a box beside the girl, old tech, scattered with scrambled patches and 3 recharged tap devices from the pre-burn grid. Jason nodded. This was no longer about protection. It was recruitment. If the girl had made it this far, she wasn't just a witness, she was proof. And proof was dangerous to a system built on denial. Jason reached down and opened the last tray beneath the workbench. Inside, a map of the undergrid, hand-labeled in faded graphite. He didn't trace routes. He punched a hole through Zone D. It was time. On the public feed, the variant made its first move in hours. It stood, walked slowly toward the center of the plaza, and lifted its hand not to wave, but to reach for something invisible. Then it pointed. Right at the camera. The crowd went quiet. A single word appeared on the local info screen, flashed across multiple terminals at once: Control. But that wasn't part of its program. It had spoken once before, back at the first test, when Jason had been declared MIA. And it was happening again. The variant was deviating. Jason's code was leaking into the wrong system. Because he hadn't just burned his bridges, he'd burned pieces of himself into every framework they stole from him. And now the mimic was glitching because its foundation wasn't built, it was borrowed. Inside Echo Tower's sublevel, deep beneath the surface, an old biometric reader flicked green. Jason's palm still matched, even after the wipe, even after the system had rewritten who he was supposed to be. He stepped inside alone, left the girl with the woman upstairs. This place was only meant for ghosts. Echo Tower wasn't a facility anymore, it was a failsafe, a memory vault, each panel covered with etched names, not files. He walked until he found it. Omega 07. The same number shown in the tape. The same tag Ashran hadn't crossed out. Jason reached behind the panel, removed a sleeve of microfilm cartridges, not digital, analog, untouchable. And that was the brilliance of it. Because to erase what was real, they had to make digital louder. But analog could still bleed. On the opposite side of the city, an unmarked facility began evacuating, not from alarm, from loss of signal. Every node tied to Jason's presence had started spiraling, not corrupted, rewritten. The variant's feed had begun looping on itself, saying the same word, control, 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 until the system purged it from the stream, but the damage was done. A civilian watching live said what no operator dared to. That's not him. That's a puppet trying to remember it used to be a man. Inside Echo Tower, Jason inserted one microfilm reel into a battered playback machine rigged from spare optics. The image was grainy but real, a hospital room. But the light, it was artificial. No windows, only sensors. Jason, younger, hollow-eyed, held a clipboard and asked a question that never made it to audio. On the bed, not the girl, her mother, and on her wrist, the same barcode. Jason's grip tightened. This wasn't about his memory being tampered with. It was about his trust being used as a delivery system. They'd made him the messenger of control without him knowing. Until now. The woman at the hideout reached for the girl's wrist, checked the pulse, still steady. Then she said something Jason hadn't told her to. That this wasn't just revenge, it was redemption. And the only way to redeem a ghost was to make the city remember what it owed. The girl didn't nod. She just stood up, took the tap device, and turned it on. Jason had left her the frequency he once used for underground bursts. Now, it was her turn to echo it, and above their heads, across street boards, cafe menus, and gym locker ads, a single line began blinking. I never disappeared. You just stopped looking. Jason was no longer alone in the system, and the variant, it wasn't glitching anymore. It was trying to become him, but it never could, because Jason bled. And this city was about to remember what it cost to make a ghost out of a man who never died. They thought the silence meant Jason Statham had gone dark. But silence was never absence, not in the world he built. It was just prelude. And now, the echoes were surfacing in places no one thought to monitor. In a shuttered tech depot beneath the East Express lanes, 3 men in plainclothes tapped furiously at consoles that weren't connected to anything legal. They weren't hackers. They were cleaners, the kind tasked with scrubbing history from circuits, not minds. But tonight they weren't deleting files. They were trying to outrun them. One by one, unlisted feeds began blinking to life on their screens. CCTV clips, traffic cams, body footage from unauthorized arrests, all time-stamped, all tagged with one identifier. Omega-07. The men stared, then swore not out of fear of Jason, but because the ghost system was feeding the data faster than they could kill it. Every terminal connected to the suppression net was now relaying Jason's face, not edited, not enhanced, just raw. And that was the problem. It wasn't about controlling his image. It was about controlling the question. Why did this man, who was supposed to be homeless, show up in operations marked classified dead zones? Why was he holding a girl with a barcode on her wrist? And why was the variant, the polished one in the plaza, suddenly removed from the live feed? Not paused, removed. On the upper floor of a non-registered medical facility, Jason didn't stop moving. The girl, now fully awake, was watching him from the observation window. She didn't ask questions, not yet, but she followed. Jason laid out 3 pieces of equipment on the tray: a visual splice plug, an override injector, and a bone-conducted relay clip. The girl leaned in slowly. Jason didn't explain. He never did, but she understood enough. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about making the variant lose its place in the story. He clipped the relay node to her wrist. It blinked once, then pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. A map lit up on the side screen. 6 nodes, one for each person who'd received footage in the last 3 days. None of them were authorities. All of them were sleepers. Civilians trained years ago for emergency activation. People who owed Jason something they could never say out loud. And now, they were online again. Across the city, in a drone management room beneath a boutique logistics company, a quiet technician named Farron tapped into a drone feed tagged JSV2. It should have been clean. Instead, the feed showed Jason walking toward the glass channel, same as earlier, but with someone beside him. That couldn't be right, he'd gone alone. But now, in the reflection of the shattered window behind him, a second figure walked parallel, same coat, same gait, same face. Farron tried to rewind, but the control locked him out. Then the feed stuttered. The two figures blurred, merged, separated again, until the system couldn't decide which one was real. Farron backed away from the screen, shaking his head. This wasn't surveillance, it was recursion. Jason wasn't trying to hide from the system. He was making the system doubt itself. Back at the depot, one of the plainclothes operators received a printed envelope. No return tag, no tracking code, just one photo inside. A freeze frame from 11 years ago. A man dragging an injured child out of a burning structure, Jason, bloodied, ash-covered. Behind him, three figures in Omega gear. The twist, two were confirmed KIA, the third was the variant, or rather, the man it was modeled after, which meant the variant didn't just wear Jason's face. It was assembled from what used to be his own unit. Jason wasn't being replaced. He was being folded into the cover-up. At Echo Tower's command tier, Jason reconnected to the legacy spine, not through a screen but through wireframe injection. The analog pathway was intact. The command interface, still functional. He keyed in the symbol sequence from the old squad. Ring, cut, echo, burn. 4 glyphs appeared. The last one pulsed red. Jason stared. Then overlaid the girl's heart pulse sync onto the 4th node. It matched. Perfectly. That shouldn't have been possible, unless she was created using parts of the same suppression algorithm they used to train the variant. Not clone, not daughter. Mirrored sequence. They hadn't just rewritten Jason's story. They'd built entire memory trees from his original DNA markers, and now she was bleeding truth they never thought would survive. The screens across the city changed again, no longer showing Jason's face. Now it was his footage, grainy, dirty, real. Footage from operations that never made it to archive. Moments where he disobeyed orders to save lives, break protocol, turn on his own. People started watching, not just operators, civilians, nurses, janitors, students. A silent consensus spread like static. This wasn't just a man. This was memory, and someone had tried to delete it for a reason. In the regional task force center, a man in a pressed uniform slammed his hand on a biometric override. A console snapped to life with only 2 words. Full replacement. His advisor spoke without turning around. The variant had failed. Jason was destabilizing public narrative control, but the advisor had a backup, a deeper layer. Omega R, not just a clone, but a redirect, a full-scale psychological replacement protocol, meant to override perception, not presence, and the key to activating it wasn't killing Jason. It was destroying trust in his timeline. Jason stepped out of Echo Tower into the misted basin of the old transit canal. His breath slowed, not from fatigue, from preparation. Across the canal, an old projection screen flared to life. It wasn't controlled by him, but by the variant or whatever was puppeting it. It showed a series of moments from Jason's past, twisted, altered, edited to make him look like the aggressor, the traitor, the unhinged rogue. Jason didn't blink. He uploaded his counter-sequence, real footage, raw timestamps, and let the viewers pick truth or myth, memory or manipulation. Then he turned and walked away, because he didn't need to prove who he was. He just needed them to remember who tried to make him forget. Jason Statham didn't need to see the end of the feed. He'd already walked away from hundreds like it, doctored truths fed to quiet rooms. But this one wasn't meant to discredit him. Not really. It was meant to confuse everyone else, because the system no longer needed to kill a man to erase him. It just needed the world to doubt the shape of his outline, and they almost succeeded, almost. Across the city, something unexpected was happening. The variant, his copy, had vanished from the official channel, not shut down, not killed, but taken offline like a faulty update. It should have triggered a reupload, a re-entry into the chain. It didn't, because something in the mirror had rejected the reflection, and Jason wasn't sure it had anything to do with him anymore. Inside a cold data core chamber below District 12, the woman with the ring, the one who'd shut down the biometric alert, walked through rows of humming towers. Each one held pieces of erased identity. Every erased face was catalogued, indexed, formatted into usefulness. But only one folder stood alone, untouched, marked Origin, JSA 7. She paused in front of it, slid in her ring, the screen lit green, but the folder didn't open to a list of files. It opened to a live feed. One from 12 years ago, Jason Statham, holding a child, reading her a bedtime story, only there was no camera in that room, no known recorder. And yet, here it was, the girl from the recent photo, the one with the barcode. Jason's voice filtered through softly in the feed, not sharp, not tactical, gentle. But what he said next made her hand tighten around the console, because he whispered a phrase into the girl's ear, the exact phrase broadcast earlier across the city before the fake variant feed glitched. He never raised his hands. You raised yours. It hadn't been a threat. It had been a memory. In the control chamber beneath the Midwest port line, a synthetic voice attempted to recalibrate the perception model of the variant. The sequence refused input. It stalled at one line of code. Doubt equals 1. The text didn't understand. They designed the variant to resist empathy, override compassion. But something had gone wrong, or right, because the variant had seen the original, seen Jason, and hesitated, not from confusion, but from familiarity. Something inside the architecture recognized the source. And it recoiled, because deep beneath the overwrite sequences and mission masks, Jason had once written the very kernel they now used to erase him. He hadn't just been a ghost in the system. He was the author of its most dangerous variable, self-awareness. At 2:14 a.m. Across 5 districts, dormant relay nodes powered back online, not because Jason reactivated them, because others did, people who had once trusted him. Some owed their lives, others owed their silence, and now one by one they were breaking it, uploading real footage, old logs. Confessionals once buried under NDA blackouts and threat of disappearance. And suddenly, the city didn't just see Jason, they remembered him, not perfectly, not fully, but just enough to know something was off about the polished lie walking in his place. The variant had all the posture, all the moves, but none of the memory, and people were beginning to notice. Near the old mercantile exchange, Jason waited inside an abandoned Sky tram terminal. A woman approached, lean, limping slightly, eyes sharp beneath weathered lashes. She used to be squad-side medical. Disappeared after the Black Lake assignment. No one thought she made it out. But Jason had a signal, one only old intercepts would understand. She got the message, didn't greet him. Just sat and passed over a strip of neurofiber. It held a single clip, encrypted. Only one person alive still used that format. Jason slid it into the portable decoder and waited. The clip was grainy, war footage again, but different. This time he wasn't the one on screen, it was Ashran Vale, standing beside a young boy, training him, not for combat, for erasure. Jason's jaw clenched. The boy wasn't him, but he looked just enough like him. Same hair, same left-handed scar on the palm, the timestamp. 15 years ago, before the official Omega training ever began, Jason looked up at the woman. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Because in that moment, Jason realized something deeper than betrayal. He hadn't been chosen to disappear. He'd been designed to be erasable, from the very beginning. A contingency. Back beneath the courthouse ruins, the variant stood in front of a mirror. No text, no directives. Just the face, the voice, the posture. But it didn't match anymore. The program had stalled. The memory implants too fractured. Too many contradictions. The more Jason exposed, the more the variant stuttered. Because memory was never meant to be clean. It was meant to be real. And real couldn't be mimicked, only stolen. For the first time, the variant's posture broke. He sat, head in hands, silent. The command unit watching from remote feeds didn't know whether to trigger a wipe or let it break. Because what if it was doing exactly what Jason wanted? What if failure was the broadcast and now, somewhere in the haze between exposure and execution, Jason stood over a wall marked with every face he'd tried to protect. 4 of them were crossed out, 2 remained. One had been exposed, the other, still dark, still hidden. Until now. Because pinned to the back of the neurofiber clip was a photo, grainy, folded, a man in tactical wear, smiling, and the name etched beneath the image, Vale. But it wasn't Ashran, it was his twin, the one they said died in the flame suppression accident at District Theta. Jason stared at the photo. It wasn't just a family resemblance, it was operational overlap. And if Ashran was the one who built the encryption layer, his brother was the one who tested the override formulas. That made him the other Omega, the final name, the one who'd never been listed. Never spoken, just archived into erasure, until now, and if he was alive, then Jason hadn't just been replaced, he was still being rewritten. The feed across the city began to split, 2 faces side by side, one polished, controlled, the other raw. People didn't know which was real. But they knew which one bled. And the system wasn't ready for that kind of clarity, especially not when the variant started crying, not a glitch, not a leak, a real physical breakdown. And all over the city, eyes widened. Because in trying to copy Jason, they had unlocked something worse than exposure, empathy. And the last line on the feed, uploaded not by Jason, but by someone inside the system, simply read, "You can't control what you made forget once it starts to remember."